Well, welcome once again to another edition of the Expansion Zone TV. And we are thrilled today with our guest because we've had him on before, but we've had him on as a duo. And so today we're going to be just speaking with him. But before I tell you who my guest is, I just want to say thank you so much for really being thrilled at this new venue or the new way that I am doing some of these interviews. Usually I'm on KPFK on Mondays at 1. I'm still there on Mondays at 1, but now I have decided to do an extension of that show, The Expansion Zone, with Sonia Barrett. And so that's going to allow me to discuss more expansive topics, kind of venture off into other areas as I choose to without stepping on any toes. In these days, there's a lot of sensitive toes. Lots of corns apparently on people's toes these days. So my guest today, do hit the subscribe button. I got to remember that. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. So right down below is the subscribe button. So subscribe now. And I'll remind you again. But today, my guest is going to be Kent Heckenlively, who has been on the show before with Dr. Judy Mikovits. We did that interview. And of course, you can always see it still on YouTube. Yes, it's one of the interviews that's still up on YouTube. Kent is a co-author of Plague with Judy Mikovits, published in 2014, Inoculated, published in 2016, and works again with Dr. Mikovits for their new book, Plague of Corruption. Kent and his wife, Linda, live in Northern California with their 2 children, Jacqueline and Ben. All right, well, I'm just going to say welcome. Kent, welcome once again to the Expansion Zone.
Thank you, Sonia.
All right, so where should we begin? You've had some juicy things happen, some juicy things come up. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, well, it's been a really exciting couple days. So yesterday afternoon, I started getting some messages from people saying that I have been talked about on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Oh, that's big.
And so I'm thinking, oh, this must be crazy. You know, Chuck Todd, Meet the Press, me. And so, for a couple hours, I just sort of like ignored it. And then I finally went to Meet the Press on YouTube for May 17th, 2020. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting because at about 24 minutes in, Chuck Todd starts talking about conspiracy theories and how they start. And he talks about it as the conspiracy bonfire.
Well, that's right. This was this Sunday.
Yeah, this is just yesterday.
I did hear some of it.
So it's kind of crazy because, he starts talking about a conspiracy bonfire. And how does the bonfire start? Well, there's a spark. And that spark appears to be this book and this film. And then I'm going like, okay, all right, okay, And then he says, this book was #1 on Amazon last week in all books. It was #3 on the New York Times bestseller list. And he actually says, I don't want to give any oxygen to this book because by saying its name, because that will just, keep this thing going. And I thought to myself, my God, I've suddenly become Voldemort. I am the book that cannot be named. I am the writer whose name cannot be said. We're just going to talk about them generally. So I can't believe it. I
did hear it though, Kent. Coming to think of it, I did hear it, and I did know that he was talking about Plague of Corruption. But I get so irritated, well, my husband watches it, and I get so irritated that I can't hear a lot of the nonsense, so I walk away. But yes, I did hear it, and it was to discredit the idea of these conspiracy theories. And that's what that was about at that time.
So for all those who may have watched, but were going, what was he talking about? This is what he's talking about. Plague of Corruption, written by me, Judy Mikovits, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did the foreword. So this is not some right-wing conspiracy. I mean, really, a Kennedy associated with a right wing? Are we really going to make that argument? So what I did is I've released a video, and I've put out an article on Bolin Report, where I write, that's B-O-L-E-N, Report, R-E-P-O-R-T, where I challenge Chuck Todd to man up and actually say my name or bring me on the show. I don't think Chuck Todd is gonna man up, but at least I've put that challenge out there.
Right? Didn't he had a doctor on as well to help to, I think, to squash these concepts. There was a doctor that he did bring on.
Yeah, it was kind of hilarious because these two nerdlies with glasses, and slide ruler in the pocket, it seems like.
Pocket protectors.
Yeah, they got the pocket protectors, they're going like, yeah, this bonfire of conspiracy gets started with the spark, and there's so much fuel and oxygen is given to it, and they get people, who are allied to support them and amplify the message. And, it's almost like I felt like Chuck Todd was having the vapors. He seemed like some Victorian prude who couldn't mention the title Lady Chatterley's Lover because the very use of the word lover would cause him to faint. So, heaven forbid that Chuck Todd says the name Plague of Corruption and tells his audience what the Heckenlively he's talking about.
Well, yeah, I remember hearing the doctor say, well, that's the problem, when you have these kinds of books hitting, bestseller lists and, Amazon and wherever, that people really then think, take it seriously. And so that suddenly being on the bestseller list was a problem.
but correct me if I'm wrong, Sonia. I was under the impression that I'd grown up in the United States of America, where when we have disagreements, we get together and civilly debate them. And so, when this huge swath of the public is supporting this book. And so here's how big the groundswell was for this book. So #1 on Amazon for all books last week, okay? Yeah. It also hit the New York Times bestseller list, and we know there's manipulation there. So I'm just on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm just below Michelle Obama, but just above Winston Churchill, okay? So, yeah. I'm between those two. It also hit USA Today and Wall Street Journal. So it has hit all of the 4 major bestseller lists. And, like I say, I thought I grew up in this place called America where, we sit together and we debate these things. We don't just, claim that we're not going to say this person's name. I mean, that sounds like some fantasy Harry Potter story where, I'm Voldemort and they cannot say my name because the very mention of my name or the book is scary. People need to be protected from thinking. How are we going to stop them from thinking?
or that they suddenly remember the Gorgon Medusa.
We must not look at Heckenlively's face, or else we will be turned to stone. Now, some people have told me that I have sort of a Jack Nicholson Joker kind of face, and maybe I do, and maybe that's not the best look, but I doubt it's going to turn you to stone.
Oh my goodness! Oh, this is hilarious. It's all hilarious just because I think one of the reasons why I find it hilarious is because of how upset so many people were when you both were on the show the very first time and it aired on the radio station. And people were calling. There were people that were calling in just really angry, and so they had to keep playing the disclaimer. I mean, people were telling me, because I didn't hear it, people were telling me that the disclaimer was being like dropped in, like, like boom, boom, boom. And so it was really something. It's like, what? And of course, with people calling in and complaining, getting mad, and you can't understand, why are you even getting angry? Because someone is presenting a position that is opposite the mainstream media. Isn't that what this is about? Isn't what this is about?
I'm sorry, Mr.
I'm about
sorry,
to turn to stone right now, looking at you.
I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. America, that you don't want to read a book, for God's sakes. I'm sorry. Do you think that actually reading a book will, overcome your rational senses? It's just so crazy. I mean, didn't we go through all this kind of crap in the 1950s and 1960s? I mean, I feel like I'm Malcolm X, or, I'm Henry Miller and I've written Tropic of Capricorn. Oh my God, it's so smutty.
It's so crazy because here we are supposedly in 2020, and people are just really shaken when anything falls outside the what they've been told, what they've been hearing. And it's like, how did we evolve then as a species? And I think people need to really look at that. How did we evolve? I mean, you have to be able to look at information that is outside of the program. It's really pretty crazy. But anyway, I'm glad that you're here today, and I hope people are hearing the extreme nature of this, with not even being able to mention the name of the book, which, Kent, this clearly shows why only a cliquey group of people are allowed to be in mainstream media giving information in terms of all the the experts and the medical experts and so on. It's like a clique of select people, yet there's tons of people technically out there saying what you and Dr. Judy are saying.
Yeah, it strikes me that these people in the media are a bunch of humorless hall monitors. Okay, these are the people that nobody liked in high school because I'm sorry, it's just terrible. I mean, I just look and listen to me.
No friends.
I'm kind of a screwball. Okay, I like to think I'm pretty smart, but I'm also got a good sense of humor. These people could not handle me or Judy, a brilliant woman. What really annoys me is, here Judy is this brilliant woman. I mean, you've listened to her. She can talk for hours. That is, I think she's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. Mm-hmm. And the response of the medical establishment is, we just have to shut her up. I mean, so it's this corrupt old boys club of science, which is shutting down a brilliant woman. And so for me, I'm just not going to stand for that. I mean, heck, I'm a middle school science teacher, and what do they always bombard us with? No bullying at school. Right. Everybody is welcome. And I'm going like, yeah, geez, I wish there were middle school values in the media, but it doesn't. It seems to be like Mean Girls in the media rather than, hey, let's talk and let's be grown-ups.
Yeah, that's not the case. And certainly the censorship level is just so pushed. I mean, YouTube is removing videos. They remove quite a bit. And taking it even a step further into what would be considered what we call alternative methods, alternative products, which really aren't technically alternative. Right? They were more the natural products. So some of those people are really suffering now at the hands of the FDA. They're being shut down. You know, one that we use the products, and the products are amazing. And yeah, they're going through it right now with a massive legal battle.
Well, it's
So
like it's like the joke. You walk into the supermarket and you see the section that says natural foods, and you say to yourself, "Hey, what's in the rest of the market? Unnatural foods?"
yeah, yeah, but people aren't thinking in that manner. But
Which is why you
anyway,
need a screwball like me to set them straight.
I don't know. I don't know, boy. I tell you, in the last few weeks, I certainly have taken a different perspective or perception in terms of aspects of the media. I already knew what was, but there are some things I didn't know, and it's like, wow, okay. So that's where we are. So this is a big reason why I've decided to establish this platform once again, to be able to do what I want to do. Uh, so let's look at some things that I think people do need to know and do need to understand, perhaps in terms of, in terms of this pandemic. But this pandemic stems from a history. I don't even know what to call it. It's not just this pandemic right now. It's the result of historic behavior, political behavior, big pharma behavior, the AMA, taking over in terms of homeopathy. I mean, so this is a long stream of this behavior.
Yeah,
What can you say?
yeah. And so what I say is, you know, I always kind of think that, simple minds talk about people, medium minds talk about events, and, sophisticated minds talk about systems and ideas. And so what we really talk about in Plague of Corruption is the system that has developed, the system of not really questioning what's going on. So, while we are very happy to say things like, we don't think Tony Fauci is doing a good job, we don't think that Bill Gates should be in charge of the World Health Organization. He's a computer programmer, okay? He's a billionaire. He does not have a medical or scientific degree. I teach science. I am a lawyer. I'm trained to look at systems. I'm trained to evaluate evidence. Dr. Judy Mikovits is a virologist. It's kind of interesting looking at all the books on virology. And, even though you've got really good ones by people like David Quammen, Richard Preston, with the Hot Zone, Robert Preston with the Hot Zone, none of these people are scientists. So when I put together my science book, I made sure I wrote it with an actual scientist. Okay. So, these other writers, I mean, they contacted scientists and everything, but did they have a scientist working with them to make sure that it was all correct? No, they didn't. I've really done, an amazing job in checking all my sources. I mean, our first book, Plague, it's very thick. It has probably 500 footnotes. Plague of Corruption, we made it for more of a general readership. Smaller. Okay, it's 200, 250 pages, with the forward and everything, maybe 150 footnotes, but everything's referenced there. So this,
You can do your own research, basically.
I do my own research, and when I was putting the book together with Judy, I'd write a section and I'd say, Judy, I don't know if I'm getting this. Could you read it and tell me if I'm saying it correctly? And am I going where the evidence leads? And she'd read it, and sometimes she'd go, oh, you need to modify it, or nah, you're kind of on the wrong track, and then other times she'd go, wow, that's a great idea. I never even considered that idea. So I think that this balance between somebody who's trained as an attorney, because I think what's really, and I think that this is something unique that I bring to it, which is that attorneys are taught to be skeptical. Okay. So, for example, the joke is always that, a client comes into your office and he says that his mother loves him. Okay. Well, they always say, well, get a second opinion. Find out if his mother really does love him. Talk to somebody else. We're just skeptical. And what seems to have happened with big pharma, with vaccines, definitely, but with a lot of other stuff, is big pharma has kind of pushed the lawyers out of the equation. That's why, I rail against vaccines. I'm sorry, I'm just going to rail against it. But the system that they have set up with this 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, where the pharmaceutical companies are completely immune from being sued for the harm caused by their products, and instead of going up against big pharma attorneys, which are pretty big meat eaters themselves, instead you get a battalion of Department of Justice attorneys. So why is it that parents have to go up against the U.S. Justice Department in order to get compensation for their injured children? I think that that's a system that just can never work. And it's kind of funny in talking to attorneys, because you talk to attorneys and you tell them this system and they're just like stunned, because we learn human nature. And if you set up a really bad system, you're going to get a really bad result. And that's what we've got. And so as a result, I think that they are firing off their last salvos of ammunition, which is by telling people, oh, this book is bad, but we won't even tell you the name of the bad book because we don't want to give oxygen to it. The people are waking up. This whole sort of thing that, the World Health Organization first says, hey, there's no human-to-human transmission of COVID. Oh, there's a lot of transmission. We don't know if you should wear masks. Wear masks. Oh, no, we don't know. The level of just, knuckleheadedness among public health authorities is becoming clear to people. And it's also becoming clear that this thing that they have done, which is to, exile dissenting voices from the public arena, has just been an absolute failure. What's really dramatic is, we finished our book in July, okay? So we have zero about COVID, okay? So anybody who says we talk about COVID, zero. We didn't know it was coming when we finished this in July, okay? But when you see what's happened, you see the same patterns of corruption. It seems to me that the biggest question we should be asking is, where did this virus come from? Okay? I'm not saying I have the answer, but I can say, as an attorney, what you learn to do is to evaluate the strength of the evidence. And the strength of the evidence seems to be saying it escaped from this lab in Wuhan. And why isn't anybody saying that? Some people are. Our own State Department is saying, well, it looks like it came from the lab, but the mainstream media isn't reporting it. It's because this is not just a China problem. This is a worldwide problem. What I always try to say, because I think the leaders of countries need to understand this, and it's not necessarily their fault. So what I say is there's a scientific elite that exists above presidents and prime ministers, and they rarely tell their leaders what they're really doing in their labs. So, for the stuff that we were doing, I don't think Trump knew. For the stuff that happened in China, do I think President Xi knew? Probably not. But here we are in this situation. So this is the problem, not of the leaders, even though, I hate the stuff that China does, repression of Uyghurs and, cracking down on the Hong Kong protesters, their authoritarianism, all that stuff is terrible. But in this instance, what I'm saying is this is a worldwide problem. This is the problem of the scientific elite that exists above presidents and prime ministers and really doesn't tell their leaders what they're doing. That's how we have to band together. So
It's
We
the
need to
same
know
old
what
corporate structure, though. What you just described is the same old corporate structure in terms of the hierarchical system in place. You have, management, you have lower management, middle management, upper management. You've got the board, and possibly at the apex of it, you've got, the really big wigs. And how that information then that's discussed at the very top gets drizzled down, is based on what each level needs to know. That's what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. And so, one of the things that I always like to say is I'm a big fan of the cartoonist and political commentator Scott Adams, who does the Dilbert comic strip,
Right.
which kind of skewers corporate culture. And so I say I'm trying to be the Scott Adams of science writers, because it's just that same kind of stupidity that you see in corporate America, which is, just take it to another, realm, take it to the scientific world. And the way they have set up their structure is that these scientists don't want to be questioned by lawyers like me. I mean, yeah, I was on Law Review. I was on, writer and editor. I think I got a pretty good brain.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people who have better brains than me. And so they are just terrified of lawyers actually asking them what they've been doing in their labs. And so that's why they're so absolutely terrified.
But
Because
doesn't their funding that's affected also by the questioning? There's a lot there, because obviously they're funded, right?
well,
Um,
here are some things that are just facts, and I encourage your listeners to kind of check out what I'm saying. But watch your typical evening news broadcast, and I don't care if it's CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News. You got 50 to 60% big pharma commercials. You can go to opensecrets.org and find out that big pharma and its allies donate about an enormous amount of money to Congress, actually about twice that of their closest competitor, which is oil and gas. So, hey, lots of people can say things about, oil and gas industry, and they do, but, big pharma is above oil and gas. I think there was one estimate that there are 1,500 lobbyists for big pharma in Washington, D.C., which means there are basically 3 pharma lobbyists for every 1 member of Congress. So there has been an incredible concentration of power, and it really is only with certain outlets that are free from that influence. I mean, when CNN is having, 50 to 60% of its news funded by big pharma, can they really afford as a business to annoy their advertisers? No, they can't. So it's really terrible, because what that means is actual journalism is not being done at those places.
oh, absolutely. And I think you also said something very key that people really need to keep in mind, is that it's a business. The media, particularly the mainstream media, the common voices, the common stages, platforms, like you said, CNN, Fox, all of those, they're a business, and people keep forgetting that. And like every company or massive corporation, they have a prescription for, or a model as to how they need to operate to keep the funds coming in. So this is
Yeah.
no different.
So I've always said that if I got the chance to meet President Trump and I wanted to give him an idea that he would probably take, I would say, President Trump, there are only 2 countries in the world that accept pharmaceutical advertising on news and television, on TV and print, and that is the United States and New Zealand. So if 50 to 60% of the revenue for the evening news is coming from the big pharma, why don't you just sign an executive order saying, okay, considering that this is something that should stay between a doctor and their patient, let's just stop all big pharma advertising on television. That would devastate all of the networks, all of the news
Oh yeah.
networks. And you know, here's a way he can sell it. You know, he could say, hey, do you get embarrassed when you're watching TV with your children and a Viagra commercial comes on? Well, let's call this the Anti-Viagra Act. No Viagra during the family dinner time, okay? You know, during the family viewing time. You could sell this thing
Yeah.
really easily.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always say, you know, like I say, I like Scott Adams so much because one of the things that he does is he's always talking about how people who have different opinions can come together on a solution. So here's one of the solutions in the Scott Adams vein, which is, okay, so there's one group of people who believe that vaccines are unsafe. There's another group who believes they're completely safe, okay? So how do we get to something that is useful? Well, if one side thinks they're dangerous, the other side thinks they're safe, why don't we just get rid of that 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, put it back in the regular court system for all of you who think it's safe, well, test it. Put it back in the regular court system. My suspicion is that if they put everything back in the regular court system, attorneys better than me would start filing cases. They would be able to get discovery actually from the pharmaceutical companies, and all of this would very quickly come to an end. And when the truth was revealed, the American people would be absolutely shocked.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And all of this brings to mind when you're talking about big pharma and all of the ads, it brings to mind a video that I recently posted to Facebook, and somebody had reminded me about this was the swine flu. This was in 70, what is it, 76?
77, 76.
Yeah, 76, 77. But it was a broadcast that was done on 60 Minutes at that time. I think it was Mike Wallace.
Right.
That was actual journalism at that time. But at that time, we were not bombarded. Big Pharma had not taken over the airwaves as much as they do. So those shows at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, weren't supported so heavily by pharmaceutical ads.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of funny because, you know, I mentioned I'm really kind of a straight arrow, but I kind of find myself, you know, sort of having like 1960s or 1970s values, which is, you know, hey, let's have a discussion. Let's really talk about the system. Let's talk about what's going on. And so, yeah, in the 70s, it seems like good journalism could be done. And, you know, I actually had read some critiques of the media and the news. And it made this kind of argument, which was not something I had thought about, which was it used to be in your typical newspaper, you know, there were all these want ads, okay? And people would pay for the want ads, okay? And so actually those want ads funded the journalism, okay? So then when Craigslist came around, what happened was all those want ads went away, and suddenly the media had to be so much more dependent on the advertisers. The advertisers want to get their message out. So it's, you know, I hear these critiques of, you know, oh, it's liberals, it's conservatives, it's whatever, you know, and it's, you know, there are other factors at play, but the media companies have been squeezed by the internet. And what's happened is that's allowed the advertisers to capture journalism. And so when you're footing 50 to 60% of the bill, it's really hard to bucket. So, but
it's just business, as they say, nothing personal. It's just business.
Yeah, but you know, it really kind of annoys me because, you know, for Chuck Todd on Meet the Press to do something so outlandish as to leave no doubt the book he's attacking, and he doesn't even have the courage to mention the title or to maybe call us up and ask us to come on Meet the Press to
Right.
defend ourselves. I mean, this is not the America I was born into.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of interesting because I like going
That's not
through.
old school journalism or the way.
No, you know, it's kind of funny because, you know, I like to go back into history because I'm kind of a history buff. And, you know, I can go onto YouTube and I can watch, you know, interviews on Meet the Press from 1965 with Malcolm X. And I'm thinking, okay, so Malcolm X can get on Meet the Press, but I can't?
Not in 2020.
I'm the modern day Malcolm X, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm worse because I must be Voldemort because I cannot even be named.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, but yes, it does make you step back and you look. Yeah, I remember the commercials that we had were, Anison, and it was like a few things that you knew you were going to see in terms of pharmaceuticals. There weren't very many things. Maybe
Yeah.
4 or 5 things that you might remember. And I mean, gradually, all other things started to be added in, NyQuil and different things. Yes, they did have cigarette commercials at one point.
Yeah.
But so it's looking back, and I think people forget. But I think if people want to really get a good picture as to what we're talking about, that was actual journalism and actual media doing its job in really presenting facts, like real facts. Go and take a look at some of the old 60 Minutes, like I just mentioned with like Dan, what's his name, Wallace. Go back and look at that. That would not be done today. That would not be done.
And I got another thing for your audiences to look up. So you can go to YouTube and type in CNN call dash my interview and 3 question marks after it. And so what happened was about a week or 2 ago, I got a call from a producer at CNN who wanted to get in touch with Dr. Judy Mikovits.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I turned my camera on, and so I had my cell phone held up, and so I called this woman back. Her name was Mi Seon. She was a producer for Chris Cuomo. And so I called her up and I said, very, very early in the conversation, I said, do you mind if I make a record of this conversation? Oh, no, that's fine. And so she said, I want to get a hold of Dr. Mikovits. Can you get me in touch with her? And I said, well, that I could, but I'm just kind of curious, given the amazing amount of money CNN gets from pharmaceutical companies, we're just concerned about your ability to be independent. And she goes, well, I really can't comment on that. If you don't think you can help me, and, that's fine. And I said, well, I might have a workaround. How about this? Why don't you just tell me what percentage of the evening news on CNN is funded by Big Pharma? And so she goes, well, I don't have anything to say about that. I can't comment. I don't know. I'm not at liberty to say. And I said, do you not know, or are you not at liberty to say? Because those are 2 different things. And she hung up on me.
I'm surprised she stayed on as long as she did.
In 3 questions, I got a producer for CNN's Chris Cuomo to hang up on me. I got it recorded. There's about 6,000 views on it. So just go to CNN call dash my interview, 3 question marks after it. And basically in less than 2.5 minutes, I got this woman to hang up on me. A reporter hangs up on me because in 3 questions, I get her so angry that she hangs up on me.
Yeah. Well, and I think, everybody has their role, and I think her role was just to get on there and find out, not to open up a bag of worms. And so this is where we're at. I said Dan, but I meant Mike Wallace a few minutes ago, in case somebody goes, no, he said it wrong. I realized after I said it.
Yeah, but think of how crazy this is, Sonia. What you just said is, oh, the producer at CNN doesn't want to open a can of worms. What? Because that's not the purpose of journalism, not to question things. What is it, to just reinforce our own prejudices? I thought, I thought as human beings alive on the earth, we wanted to keep challenging ourselves.
Right.
We want to keep growing.
Well, information, keep informing people so that people can make informed decisions. I mean, that was the ultimate purpose of news media, is to bring you usable information for your own personal evolution and choices, and the evolution of society as well. But when you have it filtered, and it takes away a level of critical thinking as well, and it also brings more a complete dependence on the mainstream, those people that unless this information comes through mainstream, it's not valid. And that's what begins to happen.
Yeah, like I've said, the media are a bunch of joyless hall monitors telling us what to think. And I'm sorry, I'm going to think for myself. That's, when I die.
You're radical.
When I die and go to heaven, I don't want to say to God, hey, I followed CNN's lead. I followed Fox's News. I followed MSNBC. No, I want to say to God, you gave me a brain, God, and I used it to discern what is best and right in this world. And hopefully what I did was, when I ran across injustice or ran across things that weren't right, I asked questions and I showed courage, because I think being a compassionate, kind, and courageous person is part of what we're supposed to do during our time on Earth. And if we're not doing that, I'm sorry, God ain't gonna be that happy when He sees you.
Right. Well, it's taking, in a way, yes, the safe way out, which is completely relying on this one particular source, as opposed to questioning truly what is being said to you. Now, I wanted to ask you, there's a few things I did want to ask you, but this for sure. In terms of this idea of this lockdown and stay at home, I mean, I just feel like there is some legal loophole in there, that because society, or in the United States anyway, here, most people really don't know the law or their rights or any of that. And it feels like house arrest or work furlough, So I'm wondering, is it just because it's done under this emergency act, why they're allowed to do that? What's your thoughts on this from a legal standpoint?
Great question. So, an attorney never predicts the outcome of something, but they'll give you kind of like both sides and then tell you kind of where they come down. So I have been reading a lot of stuff, which leads me to believe that a lot of these lockdown orders will probably be found constitutionally invalid. Because if you're going to do something as extreme as telling healthy people, they need to stay in their homes, you need to have a really good reason. And so I think that's going to be judged under what they call the highest level of scrutiny. So I think a lot of what governors are doing, and unfortunately, I hate to say this, because I've got good friends who are liberals and I've got good friends who are conservatives, but it seems like conservatives are more willing to let you make up your mind than these liberal governors, people like Gavin Newsom, who actually, one of my best friends is actually a good friend of Gavin Newsom. So, I've heard all the Gavin Newsom stories. I don't think he's a devil with horns or anything. I think he's making some really bad decisions. And from his philosophical bent, he tends to, I hate to say it but he's towing the corporate line. And even though there were a number of things that he did when he was mayor of San Francisco, specifically, he was really a leader in gay and lesbian rights and letting people marry. And I really applauded what he did with that. But I mean, my God, not letting people go out into the sunshine and the beaches of Southern California, which is probably one of the healthiest places and healthiest things you can do to up your vitamin D levels. I just think that
it's astonishing. It's astonishing. It's
I just think that history is going to look very unkindly at Governor Gavin Newsom.
And of course now, I guess, the beaches are open, but like a child, you're being told, well, you can play with the wet sand, but not the dry sand, and you can't sit down on the beach. You have to keep it moving, and you have to wear a mask. But I think also the contradiction, I think, is what's interesting. How I don't know if many people are not seeing the contradiction, because on one end, yes, they are coming out, these people that are allowed to then be in the focus of the media, the vetted ones, to say ultraviolet light, the sunlight is killing this in like whatever 20 minutes. I mean, these are things that they're saying, but at the same time they're saying to stay in the house. I mean, there's a lot of incredible contradiction, the need for vitamin D, vitamin C, but stay in the house, stay inside. So it's really kind of weird, because there are many people that aren't hearing the conflicting stories that's coming from this particular, the news source that they trust. So we're talking,
one of the things that I'm really actually very happy about, Sonia, is I'm really glad that you're getting a lot of complaints about Dr. Judy Mikovits, and I'm assuming you're going to get a lot of complaints about me, and that's fantastic, because I think,
but we had a lot of positives too. I have to say that the people that called overrode those people, but the intensity of the negative was very interesting. But the people that said, no, do not filter this.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, and I think that's what happens, because I've always claimed that the reason they don't let people like me or Dr. Judy Mikovits onto the mainstream media is because they're afraid of how normal and rational sounding and logical we will be. I mean, think about it. I'm Voldemort, but I'm also a lawyer and a middle school science teacher. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I really don't know too many villains throughout history who are middle school science teachers, okay? That just doesn't seem to go together in the job description. So I think that what's happening by wonderful outlets like yours who are creating controversy is we're bringing the fight. And so, one of the criticisms that I get is like, gee, Kent, you really like being provocative, don't you? And I'm like, yes, because when people get worked up emotionally, then they start really thinking, because you get that situation where, as you said, there's a whole lot of people who are calling you saying positive things, and there's this lower number of people who are saying negative things. Well, maybe some dialogue starts between the two of them. And they, in the opening of our book, one of the things that Judy writes is, maybe my ideas are right, maybe they're wrong. Let's put all the ideas under the microscope and see what happens. So I kind of feel like both Judy and I are calling for a return to traditional American values, where people who have different opinions debate these things civilly. And, I've always been a big fan of, you fight as hard as you can, and then afterwards you go out and get a drink and go to dinner and, talk about all the things you have in common. But this idea that because we have different views on things means that we can't be friends, or we must view our opposition as, enemies and devils with horns, just doesn't make much sense to me. So yes, I will mock Chuck Todd from here to eternity. But if Chuck Todd puts me on his show, I will be very kind, compassionate, strong. One of my favorite heroes throughout history is Nelson Mandela. because I loved what Nelson Mandela did with the Afrikaners government, because what he would do is he was so gentle and kind. And, like, I guess like the first time that, one of the, representatives of the South African government comes and meets with him in his house, which is just outside the prison, is, he's like, "Oh, can I get you some tea? Would you like some cream in that? Would you like some sugar?" And everybody's like, "Oh my God, this devil is being kind to me. He's so genteel and everything." And yet at the same time, they would say to him, "Well, Nelson, here's what we want to do. How about each one of your people are like 40% of a white person's vote?" And Nelson would go, "No."
But you can still have some tea.
The man had a spine of steel, okay? But he was also kind and gentle. And, you could just see, in all the accounts that I've read and everything, you could just see, these white Afrikaners who, were thinking Nelson Mandela was this terrorist leader. They're going to themselves, "He's so nice. He asks me about my family. He knows all the names of my children. He's genteel." And, I loved how when he became president, and it used to be that, all of the Secret Service, protecting the president were white, and everybody was thinking, "Oh, Nelson Mandela is going to come and all of them are going to be black." And he says, "No, we're a rainbow country. So, I have both black and white Secret Service protecting me. This is who we are. We are humanity, and in South Africa, it's, we are together. Yes, you Afrikaners, you think we hate you. Well, we hate what's happened. We do not hate you. We want to all live together." And so, I take solace from people like Nelson Mandela. So, when Nelson Mandela needed to be strong, he ain't going to back down. Yeah. But he'll always be genteel and courteous, and seek to bring people together. So that's really kind of how I try to model myself with a little bit of provocative. I'm a little bit of a provocateur, but so is Nelson Mandela. Right. I mean, for example, he actually led Spear of the Nation, which was the armed resistance to the Afrikaners government. So they weren't very good, but he did lead them.
Yeah, well, I tell you, all of that, I mean, just really examining all of that in terms of leaders like that, and in terms of what we look at right now, and also in terms of individuals, even banding together, like, in the 60s were a really great time to look at as well. There are many times in history, but where people had in a way, a different set of, is it guts? Is it, what was it? They were really more about fighting for truly their rights. It was very different, I would say, now. And I think now what we have is a different kind of society to some degree, that's been neutralized, and a bit more accepting, and sort of, okay, this is what we need to, because I hear that, I've seen that. Well, why is everybody fussing? If they tell us that this is what we need to do, why can't we just do it? So there is that.
Yeah, and I kind of say, I try to look at these things globally, and I'm like, why are we so dysfunctional as a world? And I've kind of come up with this perspective and doing some reading. For most of human history, up until about 6,000, 4,000, 2,000 years ago, the vast majority of human beings lived together in tribes of like 40, 60 to 100 people, okay? And so in that small grouping, you would have people of differing opinions. But because the rest of the world was so damn terrifying, you didn't exile people, okay? You probably had a leader who was probably pretty good, wanted to do the right thing. You probably had a couple people like me who are saying like, oh, maybe we shouldn't attack that saber-toothed tiger. It might be a mama protecting her cubs. She's not really, that's not an old saber-tooth. That's a mama saber-tooth. And the reason she's so skinny is maybe she's been, feeding her cubs, so there's always been those contrary voices. So I'm very happy being a contrary voice. Just because I'm a contrary voice. Yeah, it's sort of like, that's how humanity survives. So I always say, like, in any tribe, there'd probably be, a leader and then sort of like a counter leader. And, 80% would follow the leader and 20% would say, hey, listen to this guy. Sometimes both of them agreed. But let's say the leader was leading the tribe into like something that would annihilate them. Well, the 20% that followed me would survive, okay? And in the best societies, both the leaders and the contrary people talk and respect each other. And so that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm not a leader. I'm not going to be Gavin Newsom. It would drive me nuts to be governor of California. But I could be a good counter. And, if Gavin called me up, tomorrow and said, hey, we have a good friend, Eric, in common. He says you're a good guy. I should talk to you. I'd talk to Gavin Newsom.
Right. Well, that's absolutely, I think that's what needs to happen, is that kind of model, as opposed to, I think you've got one person who has so much power and influence over a large amount of people, and being able to put their foot down and say what you will do and what you won't do. I just find that very, very interesting. And I think part of it too, when you look at yourself as, I'm going to use the word adult just for, the idea of adult, but I don't even know what I consider myself. But for the sake
You're a
of
highly evolved being, Sonia.
Exactly. But looking on at that, the fact that we are parents, I've raised children, I have grandchildren, and I feel like, how dare you tell me what to do? And a lot of people feel like that. How dare you tell me to stay inside like I'm a child, to stay in. And if you go out and you walk on the beach, you sit down, we're monitoring you, and then you're going to get in trouble, in really big trouble. That's like me telling my kids, well, I told you not to do that when you go outside. Well, now you guys are banned from going outside for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of ridiculousness. And I think we want to point out again that for those people who will watch this and they'll get upset again, we didn't even really mention the mask. As of this moment, I have mentioned it, but I have purposely just not even bothered, because it creates such an upstir. But do understand this, that the only reason why I make the suggestions or the statements or the things that I say, or maybe that Kent says, it's not blindly. It's because he's looked at what he's talking about very carefully. He's assessed, he's researched. Me, I've looked at things. I'm very good at decoding, assessing, evaluating, looking at contradictions, looking at what makes sense, even though I'm not a scientist per se like that. But I think we innately have an ability to assess and to make sense if we put everything together. And so that's what we're doing. So we're not just throwing stuff out there, just talking because, it sounds good. But right, Kent, you've looked at it. I've looked at it.
Absolutely. Like I said, between the two books, probably 800 footnotes that people can go and look at the original sources. Okay. That's right. I've done my homework. I wish the critics who attacked Dr. Mikovits would do their homework and actually read our books. I hate to feel like I'm a middle school teacher to the mainstream media, but I feel like it because they aren't doing their homework. So they're having uninformed opinions, which, in their own words, having uninformed opinions is dangerous. So by their own standards, they are a danger to society.
Yeah. Yeah, uninformed opinions, but at the same time, out of their own mouths come things that really confirm what not just you and Dr. Judy are saying, but Dr. Dorothy Cahill, what she's saying, what other experts like the Dr.
Rashid Buttar?
Yeah, there exactly. There's so many people. So it's not just this, these two people that are saying this. So
I mean,
what I'm looking
think about this. Our book was endorsed by Luc Montagnier, who has the Nobel Prize for isolation of the HIV retrovirus. I would make an argument that he is probably the single scientist responsible for saving the most lives in the 20th and 21st century by what he did. So to say that we are anti-science in any way, we are not. We want to restore faith in the promise of science. We want to take it away from these mad scientists who have taken over our public health system. And so we got a lot of support behind us, and just refusing to say our name or mention the title of our book on Meet the Press ain't gonna stop the tidal wave that's coming.
That's right. That's absolutely true. And these folks won't put their names on anything, to destroy their own credibility. They wouldn't do it.
Absolutely not.
They wouldn't do it. That's just the way it is. You're not going to do it. So yeah, I know that we're definitely there on time, but one more thing. Okay, for those people who might be unfamiliar, you talk about vaccine court. I don't think many people know what that is.
Yeah, so in 1986, a Democratic Congress and a Republican President, Ronald Reagan, signed something called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which took vaccines out of the traditional civil court system and put them in a special court in Washington, D.C. So the pharmaceutical companies are completely immune from liability from their products. The other thing that's different is that in a normal product's liability, let's say you have a toaster and it sets your kitchen curtains on fire. Well, you can sue the manufacturer, and in discovery, you can say to the company, give us any documents you have where your toasters have lit something on fire. And the companies may hem and haw, but eventually they have to turn it over, okay? So you find out, oh, they've got 20 other toaster fires. All right, I guess this is an unsafe toaster. Okay, makes your job easier, right? Nothing like remotely like that happens in vaccine court. You cannot get discovery against the big pharma companies that made the vaccines unless you get the permission of the judge, which they usually don't grant. Then the other thing that's different is in the regular civil court system, there's something called precedent. So recently, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his team of attorneys, they won a case against Monsanto for harm caused by the Roundup weed killer. It was a $2.2 billion verdict because they got damages, punitive damages. And so now any person in the world who goes in alleging that Roundup caused their lymphoma, they can say, oh, remember that other $2.2 billion case? And they found out that Monsanto hid information? That's fine. Nothing like that remotely happens in vaccine court. So if you go into vaccine court and let's say you allege that a vaccine caused an encephalitis, which resulted in damage of autism, and you win your case, what will often happen is the court will say, here's your money, but you got to sign this paper saying you won't talk about it. And so the next person comes in and they make the argument to the judge, and the judge looks at them, with fish eyes going, I've never heard anything like this before. So, and even with all those problems, this vaccine court has paid out $4 billion in damages to vaccine injuries to children. So we, and when you look at other things like how many, negative side effects are reported for medical drugs, okay, for pharmaceutical drugs. And, it varies between, 1% are actually reported to 10% are actually reported. Well, let's say it's 1%. I think 1% is probably a good number. So what that means is, it's probably $400 billion at least of damages, or, maybe $40 billion. But doesn't that seem like that should be in our public discussion? Oh, we've got a product that has caused $40 billion worth of harm to children. Do you think we should shout down those people who talk about those awards?
Yeah, that's really something else. But that's why I wanted to bring this up. And then the last thing I'm going to go back to really quickly is what you had said, that you think potentially a lot of this lockdown stuff, all of this legally, what's going to get thrown, sort of thrown out. The fines, I noticed that there's just a lot of threats. But for example, if you get caught sitting on the beach when you shouldn't, or in Encinitas where they were supposedly at the time fining people $1,000 for being out of their house and doing unimportant things like watching the sunset. Is that the reason why they're not? I don't hear that much enforcement of saying a fine, other than it's a threat. But I mean, can they actually do it? Is that the reason why it's just more of a threat and they're not an enforcement?
Here's my prediction on what's going to happen. I think somebody who's a lawyer or associated with a really good law firm or public advocacy group is going to go out there and he's going to be provocative. And so the policeman's going to come along and say, "Sir, you need to move along or else I'm going to give you $1,000 fine." And the guy's going to say, no, I'm not going to move. "Sir, you really need to leave." "Well, I'm not going to. Fine me. I want the fine." And the policeman is going to have to make a judgment call, because I think, probably 80% of the police will go, not worth my time. 20% will give him that fine, and then he'll go, "Fantastic. Now I got my action." But, if you get $1,000 fine and you're going to fight it constitutionally, you're going to need like $250,000 to fight that $1,000 fine. So the person who does that is going to know that they got a way to fund that case all the way to the Supreme Court if they need to.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because that's my sense, is that ultimately that's what would happen. It would become a very expensive process in the end, particularly if that person actually wins. But anyway, there's this all kinds of legal disrupt and confusion going on at this time. Kent, is there anything else that you think we should have probably covered? Anything that you want to say? I mean, we sort of covered a whole bunch of different things that I think was necessary.
I am very aware that what I'm saying is controversial to people. But what I hope that they take away is I'm trying to explain it in a calm, rational way. And I really just want to have a discussion. So Governor Gavin Newsom wants to give me a call. I'm happy to talk to him. If he wants to keep the conversation private, I'll keep it private. If Chuck Todd wants to have me on Meet the Press, I'm happy to go on. I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'll stand up for myself. I got a spine of steel, but I'll be friendly. I'll talk to him. I don't breathe fire. I don't bite.
Oh, come on. I've seen fire since we've been doing this interview. But people, first let me say thank you so much, Kent Heckenlively, for coming on. The couple of times, the first time and then the second time, and it won't be the last time we'll chat, because certainly at the end of all of this, we have got to have another conversation, probably before, but I think at the end of this dance, it's going to be interesting to have a conversation about this again. But I just want to say to the audience to just really be open and question, just really be curious, question everything, dig into it. Don't let fear be the guiding force, because that's what's being sold in mainstream media, which is why As soon as the news comes on, the first thing in the morning you're going to hear is how many people are dead. Assess that. Assess that. Because see if the numbers add up. See if it all makes sense. But don't let fear be the force that sends you into a tailspin without actual deep, real information. All right. Well, that's it. I think we're done now. Well,
Thanks so much.
thank you once again, and of course to you, the listening audience, the viewing audience. Thank you so much for supporting this, the Expansion Zone TV, and please do subscribe to my YouTube channel, as it really allows for more exposure of the guests that I have on, and share the videos. Share the videos. That's how we spread the knowledge. Do visit theexpansionzone.com for the radio interviews as well as the video interviews. And if you want to find out more about me, just go to therealsoniabarrett.com to find out more about my work. Again, remember to live life to its fullest, and the only way to do that really is to question everything. So until next time, see you then.